How does film negotiation work?
So usually if a distributor wants a film, they'll reach out with terms. Either, everybody does it a little bit differently. Some people will poke at me and say, well, what do you want? Some will just send me an email saying, okay, here's what we would do for the film. Here's the distribution fee. And then either they have a term sheet or they just type it into an email. Usually the next step is I present that to my filmmaker, explain the company to them and what they're about, introduce them to them so they can hear it from the horse's mouth, so the distributor can tell them exactly what they're going to do with the film and how much they like the film, etc. And then we repeat that process with any other offers coming in. And then I usually try to help the client make a decision in terms of which way they want to go. And then depending on which way they want to go, there are some distributors that have come at us exactly where they want to be. And I just know from experience, there's no negotiation. They've come at me with the lowest distribution fee they ever offer, the lowest cap on expenses they'll do, the lowest term they'll do. And then there are some companies I know that they've come at me a little higher than what they'll do. And I know what the wiggle room is ahead of time. And so depending on who the client has chosen, I'll tell them, okay, well, here's where I think we can move the contract on this. If they give me the green light, then I usually call the distributor and say, hey, they like you best, but only if you can make these terms. And then if they agree, then we're good, and we go to a long form, and then there's a long form to negotiate as well. But usually I've seen most of the long forms for all the companies that I've dealt with, and some of them I've redlined before and already got a pound of flesh, and I know exactly what they're gonna agree to or not. So there really is no need to get into that in order to make the deal. We can just make a deal based on the deal memo or the email, and then worry about the long form after the fact. And if they don't agree to whatever I'm proffering in terms of a counter, I go back to the client and say, well, they wouldn't go down. Do you want to try them again, or you want to respond to their counter, to our counter, or do you want to go, given that, do you want to try the other person because maybe they're more amenable and maybe you like them more now that you've heard that they won't do what you want to do? And so then I'll go, but usually only negotiate with one at a time. It's just, you don't negotiate with two entities at the same time, because if they both accept you, if you countered both of them, they both said yes, then you've committed fraud. So you don't want to do that. So you only deal with one at a time until there's an acceptance of an offer. Then you have a deal.
And sorry, a term sheet is what?
A term sheet usually is just either a piece of paper or a PDF that has the basic terms of an agreement, not all the language of the agreement. So it'll spell out, usually a term sheet will have the length of the contract, the rights, maybe not all like it'll say video on demand rights, DVD and Blu-ray rights, advertising video on demand rights. It's what rights they're taking. But it won't have a description of each right, which will be in the long form agreement. It'll have the term. It'll have if there's a minimum guarantee that they're going to pay against the rights, against the revenues, then that'll be in the term sheet. And then beyond the major things, depending on the distributor, they might have how they're, just a quick couple lines on how they do accounting, a quick couple lines on expenses and whether they cap them or not. And so there might be a couple things to flesh out in the term sheet, depending on how specific or not specific the term sheet is, before we go to long form, to make sure, okay, we don't want to agree to this because there's a little ambiguity in the term sheet in terms of like accounting rights. So let's be sure that what we mean here is quarterly for 2 years, not just quarterly for the whole time, or what. You want to be as specific as possible before you say yes. But some of that I already know because I've seen their long forms before. So we can work off just the basic terms in order to make it a deal.
So it's almost like a Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the long form is how many pages usually?
It depends on the distributor. Some it can be 5 or 6 pages. Some it can be 26, 30 pages. Some of them have agreements where they have kind of the basic terms on the first 3 or 4 pages, and then what's called a standard terms and conditions document that's kind of stapled to it that kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of everything, defining all the terms, defining all the rights and all those things. So it depends on the company to a certain degree how lengthy it is.
And what is the standard length of term? Or does it vary depending on?
It does vary. The range is 3 to 15.
Oh, years?
Years. You do see 20 even from bigger deals, but they're plunking down a lot of money. They're really making it their film. I would say most of my deals are in the 7-year range. Usually we're negotiating down from 15 to 7. But then there are a couple companies that are more aggressive and do like 3 years. But you find that all companies have an executive there that's like, well, we never do below 3 years, or we never do below 7, and have their own standard that they just won't go below because. And I find that most companies that want longer terms, the reason they want longer terms are a couple. One is they have these big libraries and they want to, if new ways to release films come out on the market, they want to have this huge library of films that they can monetize that new way. So for instance, advertising video on demand, or AVOD, is a relatively new platform. So all these companies that had all these movies suddenly had a whole nother way to monetizing these films. And if they had only had 3 years, there'd be 4 or 5 years of films that they didn't have to put through these platforms. Another reason is it looks better on your books to have long terms. So if someone's evaluating, if a bank is evaluating your company, if you're trying to sell it to someone and you have 20 films for 3 years, they're like, well, geez, in 3 years, this is nothing, So, and you're not going to be able to monetize it with a new platform that comes around, like AVOD, or something like it. They're assets on the books of these companies, so banks just value them more if they have longer terms on their contracts.
Interesting. And is it reasonable to expect the longer the terms of the contract, the more or the possibility of an advance?
No, not really. I should say maybe. The companies that are doing 3 years are not doing advances. Yeah, so I guess yes is actually the answer to that question. So the companies that are doing 7, 10, 15 years are more likely to do advances. And I think that's because they just don't have to be as aggressive as the 3 year. They're usually offering a little bit more than the companies that are doing 3 years. They've been around longer. They might be doing theatrical on some of their movies. They just have, bigger pipeline. They're a little bit more, they're not having to be as aggressive to get films than the companies that are doing the 3-year terms.
Right. I think the movies that I've watched on Tubi, these were all films that have been out for 20 plus years.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That would be the case for, wanting them to on their, I don't know if they want them on their books, but established names from filmmakers that have been around a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Why does Slamdance co-founder and filmmaker Dan Mervish call you a shrewd negotiator?
Because I paid him.
Okay, all right, that's good.
I don't know. Dan's a great friend. I met him early on in the days of Slamdance because I think I attended the second Slamdance and been going ever since. And I've had every year I have 2 to 4 movies at Slamdance. And then at some point I struck up a friendship with Dan. It's been so long I don't remember when. And then I remember even when when he was going around with his second film, I read it, gave him some comments on it. I don't think I had anything to do with that one. And then later on, I've sold now 2 films for him and kind of consulted him on another one. And Dan's Dan is much more knowledgeable than your average indie filmmaker. So he's definitely a big part of the process when I have helped him sell a film. And so there's a shorthand there too. And so I think more than anybody, he knows a little bit more than my average client what I know, and how helpful I can be. And so, like I said, there are some people Dan could probably take the time and do what I do and get everybody to watch the film. It would probably take longer because he's not doing it year round like I am, and I think that's why. And because I stare at it and I know all these things, he knows by experience what I know. And then when it comes to negotiation, that's fun because it's we go back and forth in terms of like how we're going to try to influence the buyer that he likes to do the best by it. So,
how do you negotiate the best deal for a movie?
Well, to a certain degree, I think that most films I'm working on are going to this certain level of distributor, and there's only a certain range that we're going to be negotiating. And I already know going in what the best position that these negotiators will do for really any film if it hits that range. So there's some films where I just know exactly where they'll go, and I know where they won't go. And it's more about communicating to the filmmaker, like, here are your options. Here's how we can kind of push a little bit or pull a little bit. It does get more interesting when it gets above that level, and we're getting theatrical offered, and I find that it's best to go to distributors with the position of, hey, they really want to be with you, but here's what you got to do. I'm not a fan of saying, well, so-and-so wants it, are you going to beat them? I'm not a fan of telling people what we want up front. Usually if a distributor comes to me and says, well, what do you want? I'm saying, I usually say, we want the best possible deal, because I don't want to undersell it. I want them to come to me with the best possible thing. So there's a little bit of that. Because I've been doing it so much and so long, I don't find it that complicated. A lot of it's intuitive, and a lot of it's just knowing who I'm dealing with pretty well, and knowing where they'll go and where they won't.
So you're not trying any, if you don't let us know in 5 days, I have X, Y, and Z over here that they want it, and you'd be crazy to lose out on this.
It just doesn't work. Yeah, it just doesn't. And especially since maybe if I was just a one-off person and they didn't know me and had no history of dealing with me, but almost everybody I'm selling films to, I've sold to films for a couple decades, so it's a lot more straightforward, and like this is really I also know, since I know where they'll potentially go, I know where they won't go. I know not to go to them with something crazy that they won't do. And I have had situations where a filmmaker is like, well, push them anyway. Hey, they won't pay in advance, but ask for one anyway. And I'll do it. I don't care. But I'm always right. I mean, they're not gonna, they're not gonna do what I know they're not gonna do. I don't think I've ever been surprised that way. Another rule of thumb there is that if someone's made an advance offer, an MG offer, then they're probably movable on it a little bit. but not 100% greater than what they've offered. So if they've offered you 20,000, they're probably not going to 40. They might go to 25 or 30. That's a generalization. If they offered nothing, they're probably not offering anything. They're probably not moving even to $1,000 because that's just not the way they see it, this transaction. So it's just knowing those things, I think, that helps the negotiation.
So you pretty much know the rules of the game, the players in the game, and where those films are going to plug in, and there's probably not a lot of leeway. Like you said, if someone's not going to give a minimum guarantee, they're probably not going to do 1,000 or 20,000 for one.
Right, exactly. That's not to say I am surprised by who wants what, though. And it's not like I'm selling a film right now to HBO. I didn't know HBO was going to want the movie or pay a good license fee for it. I had no idea. And my next best offer was not even close to what they offered. So it's not that I know what's going to happen. I just know once they make the offer, I know where they'll go and where they won't go.
How often are these negotiations in person, and how often are they via email, Skype, Zoom?
They're all a combination of Zoom and email and phone, even pre-COVID, overwhelmingly, unless you're selling a film at Sundance. If you're selling a film at Sundance or South by Southwest and it's in person, then you're going to a condo and you're meeting people in person. There have been times, though, I guess there are occasions, though, where I have had filmmakers go to meet distributors in Los Angeles as part of the process, pre-COVID. But I don't need to be there because I'm just putting them together to meet in order to talk creative and what they do for the film. And then the negotiation will happen by phone or by email afterwards.
Because so much of it needs to be in writing.
Yeah, there's just no reason to get together. There's no reason to get in a car and drive 30 minutes to just do what you can do more efficiently by phone or email.
Sure. Can you explain a deal memo?
A deal memo is a term sheet at the end of the day. So a deal memo is the basic terms of a deal, the length of the contract, the minimum guarantee if they're going to pay something up front for the movie, the number of years, the rights they're going to take, and then some of the other factors that every demo is a little bit, or term sheet's a little bit different in terms of what they'll put out there in terms of what they are, it's kind of it's like you said earlier, a Cliff Notes version of the contract.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't realize the deal memo was the same thing. Yeah. It's a term sheet. Okay, maybe you said that. Okay, without naming names, what's the worst distribution deal you've seen a distributor offer one of your films?
That's a great question. Well, certainly not one that I ever would allow someone to take. It usually, when I see a bad one, it has to do with how revenues are shared. And they're just the distributor's just taking too much. There are some deals where there's some distributors out there that use other distributors to get their films out into the marketplace. And so they're taking a percentage after the distributor who's doing the work is taking a percentage, after iTunes is taking a percentage. Right, so went from iTunes to distributor to you. And some distributors, these are smaller companies, don't disclose it and say, hey, this is our distribution fee, but just so you know, we're also going through this other company. There are companies, though, that do it legitimately and say, okay, this is our distribution fee, and it's inclusive of the distribution company that is actually doing the work, that getting it out there. Or they'll say it is on top of, and yes, it's a big fee, but that's the way we do it. It's just a little bit more legitimate than hiding it, right? So the worst deal is the combination of the fact that it's fee on top of a fee, and they're not revealing They're just going to give you a royalty statement that says what came in and what they took from it, without explaining that another level of revenue went from one person to another person that came to them. If that makes sense.
Why would a filmmaker even, I mean, why would a company even think that a filmmaker would entertain? It's like an extra middleman. It's not just a middleman, it sounds like a...
Well, again, some people don't reveal it, and they don't know the filmmaker doesn't know to ask the question. Right? And
okay.
I do know one company that will reveal it if you ask them, but they don't reveal it if you don't ask them. And it's just really strange because without naming names, I like a lot of things about these people. They do other things kind of right, but that one aspect of it, I like. Why? Like, and I guess it's probably because they're not winning movies, because they have to. When they do reveal that, some filmmakers are like, well, I can't give you a percentage on top of another percentage. And I know another company though that what they figured out to do is to make the company that they go through have their fee inclusive of their fee. So the fee that they're proffering, it might be more like 30, 35% because they're having to account for giving 15% to someone else. But at least, it's more competitive than charging 25 on top of 20, right? So you do get different kinds out there, but overwhelmingly most of my films, almost all of my films, almost 100% go through companies that there's just one fee being taken out. There's one distributor I go through who takes a fee but has it inclusive of the company he's going through, and he's an honorable ex-studio guy who is very straightforward about what he does, and essentially the way the conundrum that distributors that people have when they want to become a distributor is, how do I get to market, right? Because I could go tomorrow and say, hey, I'm a distributor. You give me the movie and I go put it on iTunes through a lab. I just pay the encoding fee. Real easy. What's harder is to sell it to cable VOD and to establish a distribution relationship with the streamers and to establish a relationship with Tubi and the other advertising video on demand companies. That's harder to do. And so what some people decide is, hey, I want to distribute movies, but I don't have those relationships. I'll create a partnership with a bigger company. I'll go to the cost of acquiring and marketing the movies, and we'll just have a relationship with this company where they are the ones who put it on the platforms and do the sales. And that's fine if you're above board about it and your fee isn't too, and you're able to do a fee structure that doesn't take too much out of a dollar. But if you don't reveal it, it's quasi-criminal to me. It's not criminal, but it's very unethical. And then just the fee structure is just crazy. Like if you do a fee on top of a fee, it's just like, how do you make any money? It's very hard.
So if a filmmaker was doing the DIY, wearing the distribution hat themselves, and they've been approached or they approach someone and they don't realize this is not, that there's not just one fee, how are they going to uncover that? What kind of clues or paper trail, or how are they going to do a search to see?
So some platforms like Amazon and others have, in the details of the film, they'll have like the copyright date and a little bit of information, and some of them have the distributor name. And so if the distributor isn't your distributor, most likely they put it through somebody else.
Oh, wow.
Right?
But that would be too late at that point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of companies that just don't do it properly one way or another. And I just don't send them my movies. It's
sure.
Easily handled that way.
Sure, it's a real fun, it's sort of this omitting very important information.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that it would be very difficult until you get to a point where you can't even get out of the contract, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, like distribution contracts are hard to get out of. They're not built to be easy to get out of. And especially if you're working with someone who didn't tell you everything up front about how they do business, most likely they don't really care if you want to get out either, right? That's the kind of person they are. So that's why it's very important, if you are DIYing it, if you are going to distributors or producer reps or anybody, you should be checking IMDb and calling those filmmakers and trying to get enough of them to tell you what their experiences were so that you can make a little bit of an educated decision on where to go.
Sure, and even in doing that, you can still run into problems.
100%.
So people know each other, they could be friends, they could have alliances. Yeah, it's real tricky, but yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that. So that's for filmmakers that, because in that there's a bigger chunk being taken out because there's this extra person.
That's right.